Good afternoon. I'm Karen Merrill, licensed clinical social worker, RBH presenter, and EAP provider. And I have the pleasure of spending the next 50 minutes or so with you talking today about compassion fatigue. My sense is you've probably attended these trainings before and know that we intersperse polling questions to make it a little more interactive, and also try to leave some time at the end for questions and answers. Also, at the end, the PowerPoint is made available to you, and there's also a couple of handouts that are attached to the training as well. So we'll get started. So it's been over the last few years that our awareness has been raised for the concept of compassion fatigue, and our understanding of the unintended consequences of choosing a profession that deals with helping others. So today we'll be looking at the financial cost of caring, as well as the emotional cost. The definitions we'll be dealing with, signs and symptoms, other factors that contribute, assessing your own risk for compassion fatigue, developing a prevention and recovery plan, some things to help you go forward that can help make a difference. And also we'll look at just how important the group norms are within the organization and a work group that help prevent compassion fatigue. So the actual cost of caring. Job stress costs American industry an estimated $250 billion annually. That's a huge, insurmountable amount of money. And that includes lots of different things. It includes medical costs. It includes turnover. It includes stress claims and all the things that really contribute to that cost. And my sense is that care providers contribute to a disproportionate percentage of that cost, just because we carry more stress for the amount and the environment in which we function. So care providers are stressed by constantly increasing caseloads, probably limited resources, demands for increasing documentation and higher patient-client acuity. So the question is, and what we'll try to address today, is who's caring for the care providers? Where is it that the resilience can be built so that care providers can continue in a stressful arena? So we'll be addressing these terms today to kind of set the stage. Let's look at compassion fatigue, otherwise known as secondary traumatic stress, or what we call vicarious trauma. This really deals with the emotional residue of exposure to working with the suffering, particularly those suffering from the consequences of traumatic events. What happens really is that we absorb the experiences of our patients or clients that can lead to our own feelings of emotional and what we call mental bankruptcy, where if there aren't enough resources in our kind of emotional resource bank, we can hit rock bottom. Now, we oftentimes think about people that deal in this area as police workers, firefighters, emergency responders, and that's certainly true. But people that work in hospitals, administrative personnel, nurses, and then those who even work in related medical professions, whether that's insurance, billing, we're dealing with people under stress that are suffering from medical or emotional needs. So this is a constantly expanding arena. And then burnout, and you may have attended training in the past on identifying and preventing burnout. Burnout is that state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by long-term involvement in emotionally demanding situations. It's really a result of frustration, feeling of powerlessness, and inability to achieve our work goals, no matter how much time we have. That, in fact, we're powerless to impact things. So burnout is a related arena, but not exactly the same as compassion fatigue. So let's jump right into polling question number 1 as we start to move to signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue. So the following are signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue, except nightmares, spending more time with others, experiencing a general sense of anxiety and despair, and experiencing a perception of not having time or energy for self-care. So, which is the exception of these 4 to compassion fatigue? We'll give you a couple minutes, and then Brenda will let us know how you've all polled.
Okay, Karen, it looks like we have 29% of participants voting for nightmares, 60% voting for spending more time with others, 29% experiencing a general sense of anxiety, and 29% experiencing no time or energy for self-care.
Interesting. So, yeah, 3 are pretty equally divided, and then number 2 has the most votes, and you're absolutely right. Spot on that generally, as we experience compassion fatigue and mounting stress, and we're more likely to isolate and withdraw than than have a tendency to spend more time with others. So good job in identifying that. So now we're going to move into the part of the presentation that looks at kind of signs and symptoms. And as we look at these, it gives you an opportunity to assess if you're experiencing compassion fatigue. And as kind of a caveat to that, I want to say that many of the things we're going to talk about can also occur if we're feeling, depressed, unrelated to work, or anxiety, or significant issues at home. So just kind of knowing that as we look at these things, having a kind of a view of what's going on in our own life can be helpful to knowing when it might be helpful to seek out and get some additional help. So, but general changes, the feeling that we have no time or energy for ourselves, that all of our energy is taken up with helping others, and that we're actually kind of drained from that. We feel disconnected from our loved ones. They don't understand what we're going through. The tendency is to more withdraw. There's a heightened sensitivity to violence. We can be more, instead of feeling, kind of desensitized, we can in fact react more strongly to violence, whether that's in our work or in entertainment or television. We can be more cynical, just have kind of a negative, cynical view, and a feeling of generalized despair and hopelessness. And it's not going to get better, and feeling low. And then breakthrough nightmares. In other words, that anxiety or depression or trauma that can be experienced or witnessed during the day shows up in our unconscious at night. So these are general changes, signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue. Now, more specific changes, actually kind of things in our environment that start to make less sense, even a disrupted frame of reference or a feeling of being less connected. Our worldview can become skewed, and our sense of spirituality, even how we see ourselves in terms of identity. It can affect self-confidence, diminished self-capacity, a feeling or a decreased belief in our self-resilience, that to be asked to bounce back one more time just doesn't seem possible. It can affect us on so many levels, and feeling that our cognitive schema, or how we see the world, our own personal way of viewing the world, can be disrupted and impacted. And our alterations in what we call our sensory experience, where we find ourselves in a situation where we may disassociate, disconnect, and depersonalize, or have disturbing intrusive imagery around it. So it definitely affects some specific changes as well. So now we're going to look at other factors that contribute to compassion fatigue. What does the situation look like? So what is the nature of the work that you're involved in? What does that clientele look like in terms of capacity, resources, and strength? What's our cumulative exposure to trauma material in our work? And then a broader view, the organizational context. How does the organization run? And what is the social and cultural context? So I think about, that we kind of interact in interacting circles. The largest one is our society and kind of the world view, what's going on out there. And then we bring it closer in to our organization, and then we bring it further closer in to our individual. And all of these things can affect each other as things ebb and flow. So as an individual, our personal history. Do we have a personal history of trauma? And what is our personality like? And our defensive style? How do we cope? How well developed are our coping styles? How stable or nurturing is our current life context? And this, of course, is a variable, but sometimes things at home can be more or less nurturing and helpful. And how much training do we have in the work we do, and what our professional history is, and how many of these things are in our toolbox? How much supervision is available to us, and how do we feel about that supervision? And then, of course, our personal therapy. Have we had some exposure to personal insight? And is that something that might be helpful, at a point in time where you're feeling like there may be compassion fatigue going on? And then we're going to keep kind of drilling this down to other factors that contribute. Our clients, again, their multiple problems and what their resources look like, what's possible for them to achieve. What's the picture of their medical problems and their abuse histories that can definitely affect how they're able to cope with their life and pulling themselves out of suffering? The intensity and how acute their suffering can be. How much crisis is available, or how much crisis is experienced on a daily or weekly basis that can keep that level at a high pitch. Oftentimes, clients that are dealing with a lot of trauma can develop some interpersonal style that can get in their way in terms of problem solving and relating to caregivers. And this can be developed in response to previous experiences with providers, good or bad. Sometimes they have an idealized view of us as care providers and what we're going to do for them. And then we can, kind of fall off that pedestal as well. How do they cope? What are their self-destructive behaviors look like? Level of despair and feelings of self-worth. These are all contribute to kind of what the client arena looks like. And then sometimes a place that's a little, harder to look at, but ourselves as the helper. So, oftentimes we go into a profession of helping others, sometimes because of our personal experience, and mostly because we have a sense of wanting to help others, whether you call that a calling or just a tendency. But we can then hold unrealistic expectations of ourselves, of what we're capable of doing, and how we're able to heal others. What does our own personal history of trauma look like? And is that triggered, or can that be triggered by a work environment? We may have an unfounded belief about how honorable and valuable being stoic and non-responsive is in the face of trauma. And then, that can leave us feeling ashamed and silenced about our feelings, kind of a message about feeling we need to buck up. I chose this profession, so I should be able to handle it. Well, should is oftentimes a word that leaves us feeling shamed instead of empowered. So being realistic about our beliefs of expressing the way we feel and finding ways to do that in helpful ways. What are our personal coping strategies look like? Are they carrying a heavy cost in the rest of our life? In other words, do we put blinders on and just burrow into our work life and not try to nurture our other relationships? Or have we developed, some kind of, maladaptive coping mechanisms to get relief from the work, drinking, drugs, or binge eating, other things that can seem to be help us cope but leave us feeling badly. Our own life, again, what are those stressful personal life circumstances look like? And are we working in an area where we've had insufficient training, or we're around others with an inadequate theoretical understanding? So we know that there's lots of things that contribute to this. And organizationally, what is the view on using supervision and consultation? Are there barriers to seeking education or taking vacations? And then what do we do about that if those are in play? And this last one, being new to the field, I think works both ways. If we're thrown into the deep water in difficult, traumatic environments, then definitely that contributes to compassion fatigue. On the other hand, research is that, the longer you're at it, unless you've developed some really good plans in taking care of yourself, then it has a cumulative effect as well. So we're going to do our next polling question. This is a true or false question. Compassion fatigue takes place when workers are not in a position to be able to refuel or regenerate themselves. We'll give you a couple minutes.
So it looks like we have about 98% of participants voting for true.
Yeah, well, this was kind of a no-brainer, I guess, question, but it's just to underscore how critical it is to in working in a field that takes its toll, how important it is to be able to refuel and to regenerate ourselves. So looking now at developing a prevention and recovery plan, as long as we remain in professions that deal with helping others in stressful environments, there's really two fundamental methods in taking care of ourselves in developing prevention and recovery. One is to enhance our self-care and address the stress that's inherent in the nature of the work. It is what it is, and then we need to make sure we're in good shape for that. And then the other is to look at how we think about it. In other words, to transform negative beliefs that may be at play, and despair and feeling hopeless. And these, aren't created certainly in a vacuum. It can happen in this environment, but being mindful of it, and again, taking care that doesn't just drill you down. And it's hard work. It takes work to take care of ourselves. So not saying that it's easy or it doesn't take a commitment and work. So addressing the stress, self-care, balance, boundary limits, healthy habits, connection with others. It's all things you've heard before. It's not rocket science. It's reminding ourselves of it and making efforts that these habits are in place. Very important to nurture ourselves and treat ourselves with gentleness and kindness, and being mindful of how we're experiencing our life. We'll talk about gratitude, reminders to breathe and be in the moment, taking a focus, including a focus on pleasure and comfort, relaxation and play, to regenerate and make sure there's that cushion in our resilience for the kind of work we do. Escape, activities that are very different from the kind of work we do, that allow us to forget about work and engage in pure fun, getting away from painful and difficult feelings. A lot of environments that deal with traumatic and difficult situations, you can hear stories that sound like black humor, but it really is people's way of coping with their environment and being able to keep going in that environment. Transforming a negative feeling, looking and hitting kind of head on a feeling of despair. Rediscover a sense of meaning or further nurture that. Significance in familiar activities. So being mindful about your hobbies, playing with children, pets. Research abounds on, if we pet and play with cats or dogs, animals, lowers their blood pressure, lowers ours. Just really good stuff. Civic commitments. Hearing the negative thinking in the tape that plays in our head, and being grateful of thinking positively and focusing on that. Engaging in community building activities. working on a common goal that offsets that psychic and spiritual isolation of compassion fatigue. Address our internal conflicts. What gets in the way? You know, it's interesting. Many professionals know exactly what they need to do for themselves, but find themselves in that whirlwind of the day, unable to implement these strategies. So it requires us to stop in that moment, take a deep breath, reset, think about what we would advise our clients to do, challenge our thinking. How else might I feel about the situation? What if I were rested, well exercised, well fed? So thinking about what thinking patterns may be getting in the way of dealing in this environment. So thinking about reframing things, you know, a critical care nurse might say, I'm only one person, and I remind myself it takes many people, many days to achieve a difficult goal. A counselor might think that their instinct is to be critical and get stuck in that criticism. So then they might force themselves to look at their attributes and accommodations that they may have had. And for emergency responders who are in the face, you know, sometimes of fire and real disaster, to tap into a spiritual belief to calm themselves and know that that's happening and acknowledging that that's happening. So we're going to look at the importance of group norms that help prevent compassion fatigue. So this kind of looks at group agreements, what your work group may look like, or organizationally. These are concepts to strive for, to look for and validate when you see them, because it's helpful and not easy to achieve. So first is that stressors are accepted as real and legitimate, that it's part of it. That the problems are not individually based, but they're problems for the whole group. And that the approach is to look for solutions and not look for assigning blame. There's a high level of tolerance for individual distress. We'll talk more later, but there's also a level, you know, of humor and lightness about it when there's so much, you know, heaviness in the environment. Support is expressed directly, often, and abundantly in the form of praise, commitment, and affection. Communication is open and effective. And as long as things are spoken respectfully, there are few sanctions against what can be said. We strive for communication to be clear and direct. And again, this takes work, takes team building oftentimes. There's a high degree of cohesion in the group, that we're in this together. There's flexibility of roles. We're not rigidly doing, that's not my job, but in fact, we'll help each other. Resources are used effectively and efficiently, material, social, and institutional. There isn't that backbiting subculture of disrespect. There's a level of respect, and things are out on the surface. And substance abuse is off the table in terms of a way to cope with the stress in the environment. We look at a 3-to-1 rule. So for every 3 units of time spent discussing a traumatic case or a difficult, stressful situation, then there's 1 unit of refueling, reframing, debriefing, or humor regarding the nature of the work. So it's just, again, a message about putting back into what's being taken out. A hospice social worker might say, I'm reframing my tears as natural and healthy expressions of the grief we must inevitably feel as a result of bearing witness to the pain of others. And this has moved me to a deeper personal understanding of the process and some self acknowledgement, not to deny it, but to know that this is a natural consequence of bearing witness to that pain. So accepting our feelings in that way and not fighting them. So the next polling question. So making commitments to myself for self-care and recovery are important because of all of the following, except the work matters, putting my work ahead of everything else is worthwhile, taking care of myself helps my family, and I will extend my work life as long as I take care of myself. So what's the exception here? Give you a couple minutes.
Okay, Karen. It looks like we have 5% voting for the work matters and
Uh-huh.
90% voting for putting my work ahead of everything else is worthwhile.
Uh-huh.
7% taking care of myself helps my family, and 5% I will extend my work life as long as I take care of myself.
Absolutely. So although there can be a tendency to feel like, I've got to get the work done. Once that happens, then these other things can be attended to. In point of fact, we can't attend to anything else if we don't take care of ourselves first. So, again, it's just a reminder about how important that is. So, making commitments to ourselves. Why? Because I matter, because my patients and my clients matter. The work I do matters. The profession matters. How do I do it? Not alone, get a friend or a group. Sometimes support groups can be very helpful. I do it one day at a time and take it like that. I do something in each realm, meaning profession wise, organization wise, and personally. I take one change at a time. I work on my mindfulness and my acceptance. I cut myself slack. I give myself the same compassion I would a client or others. And I don't forget about this and I don't give up. It's a proactive approach. So now we're moving into the self-care ideas. Again, many of these things are reminders, but worthy of mention and focus. Physically, eating regularly, not trying to save a few minutes by not fueling ourselves. Very important, particularly that first meal of the day and then lunch and dinner. Eating healthy, what we put in our body as fuel affects how we feel physically, how we feel emotionally, and what our body has to, how much energy it takes to kind of have to work on what we've put in our body um, to assimilate that. Exercise, but you've never heard that before, I'm sure. But exercise, bleeds off stress, raises serotonin. It's just it helps in so many ways. Attending to our own medical needs, so making sure we have a prevention plan, we get a physical, getting medical care when needed, and not overlooking that. taking time off when sick rather than, shouldering ahead and going into work. Folks don't want you there. They're trying to stay as healthy as they can through flu season and any other time. Remembering those nurturing things, getting massages, work out the muscle stress. Physical activities that are fun that we particularly like, whether it's swimming, walking, running, dancing, singing, something that takes you outside yourself. Getting enough sleep, not trying to burn the candle at both ends. Wearing clothes we like, things that we feel good in. It's amazing what a difference that can make. Not putting off those vacations, taking vacations, gives us something to plan for, look forward to, and then reminisce about. Take day trips or mini vacations. Even if that mini vacation's in your fantasy, visualize you're at your favorite place. Maybe it's the beach, maybe it's the mountains, but whatever's particular to you. Here's a big one. Make time away from electronics. There's a challenge. So set some boundaries around how much you look at your iPhone or computer messages after you get home from work or on the weekends. It's good training to set those limits, and your family will be happier. So try to commit to that as well. More self-care ideas. So physically, know what our unhealthy behaviors are and watch for their return. Know what your triggers are. What events or feelings precede a tendency to want to turn to habits that are unhealthy. So sometimes we have attempts to cope with feelings that come up in us that we want to avoid. So if we understand them better, what are those triggers and how do we know they're coming? It gives us a choice to do something different when we feel stressed, sad, angry, by avoiding drugs and alcohol, binge eating or purging, tobacco products, whatever those things are for us particularly. And knowing that you have a wonderful benefit in your employee assistance program. So to seek help for a healthy lifestyle is at your fingertips with that phone number. So just a reminder there. Psychologically, self-care ideas, making time for self-reflection. Maybe it would be good to take advantage of the EAP and have your own counseling. Lots of folks find benefit in writing in a journal, reading literature that's totally unrelated to work. Do something for which you're not an expert or not in charge can be a relief. Be mindful of your own inner experience. What is that kind of voice in your brain telling you? Judgments, beliefs, attitudes. Let others know different aspects of you. Try something new. Good for the brain to engage your intelligence in a new area. Practice receiving from others. It's hard for helpers to ask for help or to receive from others. So practicing that can be a helpful idea. Be curious. Wonder about things. It's also a way of getting your mind off of traumatic events. Learn to say no, set limits to new responsibilities sometimes, or reevaluating those that feel like they get in the way. Emotionally, a good reminder is to choose to spend time with others whose company you enjoy. We have a finite amount of time and energy, so choose those people that make you feel good to spend time with. Commit to staying in contact with important people in your life. Give yourself affirmation, praise. Keep a gratefulness journal. Think about first thing in the morning, 5 things you feel grateful for. Last thing before you go to sleep, 5 things you feel grateful for. People that do this practice are happier and have a greater sense of well-being than those that don't. Sometimes rereading our favorite books or rewatching our favorite movies can feel good. And identifying those comforting activities, places, relationships, seeking them out, allowing yourself to cry, like that one reframing example we had, expressing your outrage in constructive ways, writing letters to politicians, marching, protesting, give things that may not make a huge difference, but can make us feel like we're choosing to do something, giving us some power over it. So our last polling question, true or false? It's helpful for self-care to spend time with friends that allow us to vent. True or false? We'll let you vote in on this one.
So we have 91% voting for true.
Absolutely. Sometimes we don't want somebody to solve it for us or give us a list of suggestions. Sometimes we just want to be around friends that just let us vent. So it can be very helpful to remember that. More spiritual self-care ideas. Time for reflection, time outdoors. It's spring is coming, so when it's when weather allows, spending time outside, looking at those spring blooms and listening to birds sing, being open to inspiration and cherishing your own sense of optimism and hope and listening for it. Being aware of non-material aspects of your life, open to not knowing things. We expand our brain by learning, so knowing that's a good thing. Identifying what's meaningful to us and putting that in place. Meditating, singing, praying, time with children, identifying experience of awe, and contributing to things that are important to us. It's all around balance and getting a focus into nurturing, refueling things. In our workplace, taking a break throughout the day, getting up from your seat and walking down the hall will re-energize and re-oxygenate your brain. It's well worth the time. Taking time to chat with coworkers in positive ways, setting limits though with those that are robbing our time, knowing the difference, identifying our projects that we like and look forward to those, balancing our caseload, remembering how important our workspace is so that it's comfortable and not cluttered. We find that clutters our brain and the way we see things. Getting regular supervision or asking for consultation, trying to negotiate for your own needs, it's good practice. Thinking about a peer support group and developing a non-traumatic area of professional interest. This is a big one, is setting realistic expectations. What's actually possible? What can we really expect? Striving for balance, knowing that we're striving towards it and don't always achieve it. Between our family, our relationships, playing and resting. We cannot undermine or diminish how important it is to finding things that make us laugh. So particularly in stressful work environments, we lose sight of the things that are worth doing. And we need a humorous perspective to find good or joy in adversity. Find humor in the absurdity of an event, which can actually provide a sense of control. Remembering to take problems seriously and ourselves lightly. Believe in laughter and humor. Smile, even when you're by yourself, can make a difference. Laugh out loud, laugh at yourself. Look forward to at least one thing each day. Slow down. Listen to music daily you enjoy. I'll underscore number 8 and say it again, is to turn the news off. That can be helpful in itself. Practice optimism. If we can be taught to feel bad, then we can definitely be taught to feel good. So we've talked about a lot of things, a lot of ways of kind of understanding what goes on and working in this area, and then tips. And if we were in the room together, I'd ask you to say what your 3 favorite ways of addressing compassion fatigue would be in your professional, organizational, and personal areas. So what I am going to do is challenge you to try to jot these things down, either after the training today or within the next day or two, so that the time you've spent today is even more valuable and worthwhile. And then of these commitments, to place an asterisk beside every strategy you could implement in the next month. Circle 1 that you're willing to implement in the next week. And then lastly, how you'll address what gets in the way, how you'll address the internal conflicts that may prevent you from implementing these practices. Oops. So, any questions for me before we close today? We've got a few minutes. Anything anybody wants to ask? Anything coming in, Brenda?
Nope. Oh, wait a minute. I think we maybe just got a question.
Okay.
Hey, we do. Very good. What have you found to be the most important action to take in this area?
I think the most important thing is to have a really solid self-care plan. How do we take care of ourselves? What do we do to kind of strengthen our well-being? And what do we do when we feel as if things get in the way? How do we combat that? What's in the toolkit in terms of what we do? I think that the most important thing is facing it kind of head on and not letting it pull us down, that we're aware of the toll it takes and understand it, and also to be straightforward in communication with others. So I know that that's more than one thing, but it's all kind of included in a self-care plan. Thank you for that question. Anything else?
Thank you, Karen. I don't see that we have any other questions. Let me just
Okay.
check.
All right.
Okay, you do. What is the best way to handle those who do not want to respect your setting boundaries and having to say no to their needs so you can take care of your own?
Yeah, it's just you stick at it. You stick to it. You know, people I'll say that, people will implement what I call change back behavior. So, when you're trying to change the rules a little or implement boundaries, they're going to push it so that you don't. And I think that you just respectfully reinforce it. Kind of, like you would in modifying kids' behavior or relationship behavior. You stick to your guns in a respectful way. Take lots of deep breaths and know, what's possible. But knowing that that's something that it's important to hold fast to. Good question. Okay, well, thank you so much for being attentive and listening. And I hope that you also take a look at the attached handout on 6 mindfulness exercises you can try today, because it's also just reminders about how we stay above water in dealing with stressful environments. Have a good rest of your day, and thanks again.